Hello and welcome to the channel. I'm ZeroSkater12 and I'm very excited because after taking some suggestions from viewers, I've decided to start up a Patreon. And if you're unfamiliar with Patreon, for as little as $1 a month, you can support me in bringing you all premier Unmatched content. And if you are interested in some other cool benefits, there are different tier levels as well. You can find all the info on my Patreon page. The link will be in the description below. But I'm very excited to be starting that up today. And I wanted to say thank you all so much for your support of the channel. So regardless of whether or not you want to support me on Patreon, I really truly appreciate each and every one of you and will continue bringing you amazing Unmatched content because I love this game and community so much. So thank you all again, and let's get into the video. What's up guys, ZeroSkater here, and today I'm really excited to be kicking off the first in a new strategy series on the channel. Today talking about some competitive Unmatched terminology. Now, there are a lot of terms that are tossed around the community that maybe you don't quite know what they mean, so we're going to be trying to define some of those terms as well as discuss some of the concepts. So I'm really excited, and if you're looking to get into competitive play, this is definitely for you. And even if you're a casual player, I think you will enjoy hearing about some of these topics as they are quite interesting and they can help you up your game around the table with friends as well. So the series is going to be generally focused on a variety of topics, not necessarily specific guides on how to play certain characters. If that's what you're looking for, I highly recommend going to check out Baked Goods because he has a ton of high quality character guide videos that will teach you how to play specific fighters in depth. Now, we may get into some of that in the channel here, but this series is more so going to be focused on general tips and tricks and ways to improve your gameplay if you're looking to get into competitive play. So I'm really excited to be kicking this off. But before we get into it, as always, be sure to attack the like button if you enjoy the video and subscribe for more Unmatched content. And with that said, let's get on over and talk about some Unmatched competitive terminology. Alright, so to start things off, I want to give a little bit of structure to the video. So we're going to be splitting these terms up into a few different categories. The first category being pre-game. So any terms that have to do with the setup of the game or just anything outside of gameplay. The next category will be offensive gameplay terms. Then we'll do defensive gameplay terms. And then we'll close it out with endgame terms. So starting off with the first category being the pre-game, one of the biggest and most important and commonly tossed around terms that you will hear in any competitive gaming community is going to be meta. So meta I would define as the trends seen in a competitive format based on a community consensus of character strength. So what does that mean? It's all perception, right? It just whatever the community deems as the strongest fighter is going to be the meta. Now that can change based on the format, of course, because you're going to have a different meta for something like Conquest format or for the ladder format, where in ladder you have a limited roster of only 10 fighters available, so it's going to form its own mini meta within that roster, which is part of the interesting things about ladder because it cycles every month, so there's always a new meta to discover. That's part of the fun. Now, meta can also change with or without the introduction of new fighters. So when a new set is released, you better believe that those fighters are likely to shake up the current established meta. We saw this in the Winter of Champions tournament just recently. So Battle of Legends Volume 2 came in, and we saw Yananga and Wukong very, very common in the meta because of their good matchups against a lot of the big three, which were the pre-established meta. So that definitely shook things up. But even without new fighters being introduced, you can see the meta shift because it's all trends, like I mentioned before. So if you see a lot of Bigfoot being played and that's the meta, well, if you can find a Bigfoot counter and play anti-meta like Sun Wukong, now maybe Bigfoot will fall out of the meta because why would you bother picking Bigfoot when you're just going to get countered with Wukong? So now Wukong is the new meta, and maybe that opens up a space for somebody like Robin Hood to come in who counters Wukong. And then maybe Bigfoot comes back in because Bigfoot's good against Robin Hood. So the meta definitely shifts because it's all based on the trend in the community. So with that said, I think meta is a very important term for anybody to know who is looking to get into competitive play. It's definitely going to help you succeed if you are aware of the meta and you either play into the meta or you play around it to counter it, which is going to lead us into our next term being counterpick. Now, a counterpick I would define as a character chosen to beat a specific opposing character. So as I mentioned previously, Sun Wukong is a great counterpick to Bigfoot because of the way his deck and ability interact with Bigfoot's gameplay pattern. Bigfoot wants to just maneuver and attack and hit you really hard constantly over and over throughout the game until you crumble. Now, Wukong can play around that very well with his great defensive cards, as well as his ability summoning clones and putting up a wall of bodies in the way that Bigfoot has to hit through, and essentially converting all of Bigfoot's attacks into only 1 damage, since that's the amount of health it takes to summon a clone for Wukong. So he just works really well against Bigfoot, but oftentimes counterpicks are weak into other matchups, because if they weren't, they would just be the meta. They wouldn't necessarily be a counterpick, because if they were good into everything, then everyone else has to play around them. Now, some other good examples of counterpicks would be Bloody Mary into Yanenga, because Yanenga has no draw power and no cancels, so Bloody Mary gets all of her powerful effects off, as well as can push a lot of aggression with her draw power and 3 action turns. Beowulf into Dracula is another great example of a counterpick, because Dracula is essentially giving Beowulf free rage anytime he uses his ability at the cost of only 1 health, and Beowulf has so much health that he can avoid beast form lethals really easy, and the threat of Grendel is so huge that it makes things very difficult for Dracula to close out the game. Then you have Invisible Man into Alice, because Invisible Man has 10 auto damage, which auto damage just being scheme damage or effect damage that can't be stopped, right? So Invisible Man having 10 auto damage, Alice only has 13 health, that makes only 3 more health Invisible Man has to take care of, and he can easily do that with Surprise Attack, which would cancel a Looking Glass anyways. Then you have Raptors into Sherlock. Now that is a great counterpick because Raptors have so much early aggression and can chain together attacks for combo turns that Sherlock is likely to run out of defenses because he has so many schemes in deck, and he has little to no draw power in his deck as well. So with counterpicks, the effectiveness of them varies by the format, because in ladder, for example, you either will get choice of map or you'll get choice of starting position, but you don't get both. And so that can be crucial in a matchup like Raptors into Sherlock, and leads us perfectly into our next term being advantage. So when talking about advantage, it means getting the choice of map and or starting position. So it changes based on the format. In Conquest, for example, advantage means both, because the follower or the loser of the previous game gets to pick both map and starting position. Now in ladder, it's a little different because one player gets map advantage and the other player gets position advantage to try to balance it out relatively. So it's going to change based on the format, but map and position make a huge difference in any given matchup. So that's something that cannot be ignored in Unmatched. So if you are unfamiliar or uncomfortable playing on certain maps, I would highly recommend you go get some experience on those, just so that you don't get caught off guard in certain scenarios, because it's a big impact, right? It plays a huge role in the outcome of any game, so advantage is always something to consider. Now, some counterpicks are only really effective when you have advantage. So the Raptors Sherlock, I think, is a great example, because Raptors want that early aggression and they want to have a map that they can easily get to Sherlock at all times. So a tight map, so something like Heorot, which is pretty much their favorite map, they can easily maneuver up and surround Sherlock turn 1 so that they get their attack buff from their ability. They can push early attacks and try to pull off a big combo turn and hopefully run Sherlock out of defenses. But if Sherlock were to get starting position advantage, then he'd draw up to 7 cards and the Raptors would have a hard time chewing through defenses as easily. And if it's a certain map where it's a bigger map and Sherlock can easily get away, well, that's going to help him out as well. So I think Raptors really want both advantage in this case to be an effective counterpick. Another great example of this would be Beowulf into Dracula. So normally I think Beo's a great Drac counter, but if Drac gets advantage and he goes to somewhere like the Raptor Paddock and he Ravenings Beo into the Raptor Pit and pins him, then he'll just eat him away with his ability and draw a bunch of cards, and I don't think Beowulf can really keep up. Otherwise, Drac can go to Yukon, and he can just kill Wiglaf early and then run around the Yukon loop and exhaust Beowulf. So those are some ways that Dracula can flip the script on an otherwise unfavorable matchup because Dracula got advantage. So It's a huge factor in any game, especially when you're talking about in a competitive sense. So you always have to consider advantage when talking about win rates and your chances in a particular matchup. So let's talk about some offensive gameplay terminology now. So the first term I want to go over, and probably one of the most important if you're trying to be aggressive, is tempo. So I would define tempo as the ability to control the pace of the game. Now this is kind of an abstract idea here, so I'm going to try to explain it the best I can. But essentially, I would say tempo is being proactive versus reactive. Because let's picture a scenario where your opponent has 5 cards in hand. So it's a good amount, right? But you are going to be proactive. So you want to take control of the tempo, you maneuver up, and you attack them anyways. Now let's say they defend with something like a regroup. So you get rewarded for controlling the tempo, being aggressive there, and you get damage over the top of the regroup. That probably signals now that they don't have the best defenses in hand, because maybe you expected something like a feint or a skirmish to come out, something of quality, right? But it was just a regroup. So that was probably all they had. And so now you're forcing them to react, and they're either going to maneuver away, which is the most likely thing to happen, or they're going to counterattack you back. But if they counterattack you back, then they risk taking big damage yet again if they indeed did not have any quality defenses. So if they maneuver away and you push the aggression further and you attack them again, now they're in a similar situation, because if they happen to draw a good defense, they probably play it, but then they might be left with still no defenses in hand. Or maybe they didn't draw defense or anything quality and you get rewarded yet again. So forcing your opponent to react to what you're doing kind of gives you some insight into what might be in their hand based on how they react, because you want to have options when you're being reactive, right? And sometimes you just don't have the best options if your opponent is being very aggressive and controlling the tempo of the game. Now, another thing is that generally attacking deals damage and defending does not. So I know there are some defensive cards like Equal of Grendel that deal damage from their effect on defense, but just based on combats, the attacker is dealing damage and defender isn't. And so if you imagined you both had a handful of versatile cards, the player who's doing the attacking is going to be coming out ahead over the other player, because the other player is just using their cards to save themselves health, right? To prevent damage. So that's really, I think, the best example of tempo is just being proactive and attacking, because you're progressing your game state. You're lowering your opponent's health total, which is getting you closer and closer to winning. And so if you can control the tempo of the game, you'll be in a better position than the opponent who is just reacting to what you are doing to them. Now, a big way to control the tempo leads us right into our next term, which is going to be hand advantage. So hand advantage is just having more cards in your hand than your opponent. So if you don't have hand advantage, it's very hard to control the tempo, because you probably have less options than your opponent, because more cards equals more options generally. So if you have 3 cards and you go up and you attack your opponent and they have 6 cards, they'll probably defend it, and then now it's 2 cards of yours to 5 cards of your opponent, and they have no fear counterattacking you, and that essentially lets them reverse the tempo, because now they have the hand advantage and they are going to be the one chasing after and attacking you, and you are going to have to probably double maneuver away. So if you're controlling the tempo because you have hand advantage, it not only gives you more options, but it gives you the cards necessary to actually push that aggression. Because when your opponent double maneuvers away, almost always you are having to boost in order to catch up and attack them on your following turn. So you need that hand advantage, so you have extra cards that you can throw away in order to boost, to chase them, and keep controlling that tempo. Now, this is unsustainable unless you have draw power. So somebody like Robin Hood or Bruce Lee might be able to sustain this pretty well because of their draw power, but most fighters will have to back off and relinquish control of the tempo at some point, because when you maneuver and boost, you're drawing a card for maneuver, you're discarding a card for boost, so that's a net 0, and you're attacking, which is a -1 card in your hand, whereas then your opponent double maneuvers, so they +2 cards, then you maneuver, boost, and attack, so you're -1, and they lose a card as defense, but they just plus 2'd on their previous turn. So at some point, the hand disparity is going to flip, and then you are going to be the one who has to run away, and now they will be controlling the tempo. So it shifts back and forth based on the hand advantage most often, and it's definitely something to pay attention to throughout your game. But controlling the tempo and having hand advantage is not always what you're trying to do in a certain matchup. It's not always the optimal play, because sometimes you're trying to play more defensively and take it to the long game. So that is going to lead us into our next category of terms, being defensive terms, and one of the most important would be fatigue, otherwise known as exhaustion is the official term. And fatigue is just running out of cards in deck and taking damage anytime you would draw, because per the Unmatched official rules, anytime you're supposed to draw a card, whether it be by a maneuver or a card effect, when you have no cards in deck, all of your fighters will take 2 damage. And that is a way to put a clock on the game and not let them drag out indefinitely. And it's a really great mechanic. I really, really love it personally. And it's just something you have to play around and you have to consider if you want to be a competitive player. Not all games go to fatigue, but many of them can, based on the way that the players are choosing to play and based on the matchup as well. So one of the most important terms to talk about when it comes to fatigue or defensive gameplay is going to be pass. So if any of you have watched my gameplay videos or any of the official tournament coverage, I'm sure you've heard this term before, but a pass would be defined as a scheme that does not draw cards or gain actions. And so what passes do is they can be used to prolong fatigue, because they keep your deck count higher than it would have been if you were to take a maneuver or play a scheme that did indeed draw cards or gain actions, because oftentimes gained actions translate to maneuvers. Now, some examples of passes would be Jackalope Horns, which also deals damage, which is great. You have Baptism of Blood, which also brings back a sister and has healing. You have Vigor and Courage, which is a random discard out of your opponent's hand. Then there are cards like Lady of the Lake, which can be a pass or not depending on how you use it. Because if you use Lady of the Lake to grab Excalibur from the deck, you didn't draw per se, but you took a card out of your deck and you lowered your deck count by 1 card. So in that case it would not be a pass, but if you use Lady of the Lake to take back Excalibur from the discard pile back into your hand, then it was a pass because your deck count didn't deplete. Then there's cards like Remote Detonation from Muldoon's deck, where it can be used to pop a trap and then deal the damage, and then Muldoon will draw a card because the trap was removed. Or if there are no traps available, you can still play the card, and per the Unmatched rules of do what you can, ignore the rest, then if there's no traps, then the Remote Detonation would be played and essentially have no effect. And if you're playing that with no effect, then that's a pass. Now, that might not seem very useful, because why would you want to play a card that has literally no effect? But passes can be very, very impactful when it comes to fatigue gameplay. And calculating the deck counts and whatnot during an endgame scenario, you know, it's crucial sometimes. It'll make or break a game. And so that Remote Detonation as a pass can be very, very helpful, which is surprisingly good. You wouldn't think of it like that, but another great card is Vanish from Invisible Man. That is like the ultimate pass, because Vanish, if played on your first action, will end your turn. It removes him from the board, heals 1 health, but it would end your turn if first action. And so you're actually taking away an action of yours that you would have had to use probably to maneuver, right? So Vanish is almost like a double pass, which is awesome. So with all that said, attacks can also kind of be passes. Now, it's a little abstract in that sense, but if you can, say, attack a sidekick with a card that maybe has some movement on it, or it doesn't have draw effect on it, and you just hit the sidekick, and then maybe you use the movement effect to get away, and you're still out of range of your opponent, and so instead of drawing a second card from a second maneuver, you maneuvered up and you attacked them as one of your actions. So attacks can kind of be passes in certain scenarios as well. Now, pass, talking about this, will also, there's one other thing they can do, which is going to lead us into our next term, which is going to be that passes can be used to force initiative onto your opponent. So let's go ahead and define initiative. I would say this is the player who must approach the opponent or make the first move in a standstill. Now, initiative sounds like it would be a good thing, and this is a little counterintuitive, but oftentimes in Unmatched, if the initiative is forced onto you, that's a bad thing. Because initiative is forcing you, right? It's almost taking away options and making you play a certain way when you might not want to otherwise. And initiative can be determined by the amount of cards in hand or in deck. So if you imagine a scenario where you only have 5 cards in your deck and the opponent has 10, that's such a big disparity in the deck count that if both players didn't want to approach the opponent and they just sat back and double maneuvered over and over, then you would hit fatigue much sooner than your opponent and take a lot of fatigue damage and essentially lose the game. So that means in that scenario, you would be forced into having the initiative. So that means you have to approach your opponent. Now, a great example of where you might not want to do this is against Medusa. So the Yanenga versus Medusa matchup is very tempo based and initiative based. Both are very important in the matchup, because if Medusa is forcing Yanenga into taking the initiative, that means Yanenga has to end her turn in Medusa's zone. And that means Medusa is getting free damage with her special ability. So forcing the initiative into Yanenga there is a bad thing for Yanenga. Now, not only cards in deck, but cards in hand can do the same thing. Because let's take that same example of that matchup, and let's say Medusa has 5 cards in hand, Yanenga has 7 cards in hand. Now, it's Medusa's turn. She could go in and attack and take control of tempo, or at least try. Or, more likely, she's going to double maneuver and back off and end her turn at 7 cards, because now Yanenga already has 7 in hand. So Yanenga has to either maneuver and attack and end in Medusa's zone, or she overdraws. And you don't want to be overdrawing because that's wasting resources that could be valuable throughout the course of a game. So both deck count and hand count play a huge role in who has initiative. And initiative can be changed based on passes, because let's say Yanenga had 5 cards in hand, Medusa had 7. Yanenga double maneuvers and backs off at 7 cards. She's thinking, oh, it's fine, I'll double maneuver up to 7 and back off. Now Medusa has to approach me, because if she doesn't, she's going to overdraw 2 cards. But now Medusa maneuvers up to 8 and plays, let's say, Winged Frenzy, which lets her just move and resurrect one of the harpies. So now Medusa got value off of her scheme, the Winged Frenzy, and remained now at 7 cards because that scheme was a pass. So now Yanenga has the initiative forced on her, being at 7 cards, because again, she has to either approach or overdraw and waste resources. So passes can change up the initiative, and that's something to be aware of in a competitive game. So it's a very, very important concept when you're trying to play defensively, and any fatigue-oriented gameplay, initiative is a big thing, so definitely you want to keep this in mind. So now finally, let's move on to some endgame terminology. And one of the most important terms for endgame scenarios is going to be lethal. So lethal would just be defined as the act of reducing your opponent's health to 0. That's how you win the game, right? You need to deliver a lethal blow to your opponent. Now that could be from an attack, that could be from a scheme effect, that could be from fatigue damage. It doesn't matter how it's done, but you need to find a way to get lethal on your opponent. Now, there's a couple of different terms revolving around lethal that I want to talk about that are very, very important. And the first one I want to talk about is lethal range. So lethal range I would define as being at or below a specific health total where certain cards can represent lethal. Now, this should be avoided if at all possible, because being in lethal range eliminates certain cards from being played safely. So a good example of that would be if you are Alice and you have Looking Glass, which is a fantastic card and it can provide some healing to bring up your health total. But if you are at, let's say you're facing Bigfoot and you are at 4 health with Alice, Bigfoot has his log, right? The 6 value attack that he could be using to attack you with. So if you're at 4 health as Alice, you can't safely play Looking Glass anymore, because if it's the log is going to lethal you over the top of your 2 defense value before the after combat effect has a chance to trigger and give you your healing. So that can change obviously if you're Alice, if you're small. So if you're at 4 health, you need to either A, not play Looking Glass as a defense anymore unless you want to risk losing the game right then and there, or B, you need to play as small instead of being big, which can force you to play suboptimally. So if you are at, let's say, 5 health and you expect Bigfoot to be playing a Disengage, which is a 4 value attack, you have a 3 value defense like a Mad as a Hatter in your hand, and you're big, so it's going to be a 3, or you have a Skirmish in hand. You might want to defend with the Skirmish, because in the case that he is playing a 4 value attack like you suspect, like the Disengage or maybe even a Savagery, your Skirmish will keep you at 5 health, which means you can safely play your Looking Glass still, because you are not in lethal range of the log. Now, if you played the Mad as a Hatter, then your 3 value defense would take 1 damage from his 4 that he's attacking with and bring you down to 4 health, which again puts you in that lethal range of the log over the Looking Glass. So you want to try to avoid these lethal ranges as much as possible. Now, another example is Dracula with Beast Form, right? If he comes and attacks you and you calculate the damage that the Beast Form could cap out at, and let's say it would be lethal, if you have a feint in hand, you probably want to play the feint, because playing any other defense risks dying to the Beast Form if that is indeed the card he's attacking with. And so that's a great way for Dracula to bait out feints with other attacks that aren't Beast Form by threatening lethal ranges over the top of any other standard defense like a Skirmish. So be mindful of your health total and what you're using to defend with, because you want to avoid lethal ranges, as that eliminates options from being played safely, and options are power and Unmatched, as we saw with tempo and hand advantage, right? So you really want to keep your options open, and so stay away from lethal ranges if you can. But that's going to lead us into our next term, which will be confirmed lethal. So confirmed lethal would be defined as a card that is guaranteed to defeat the opponent based on all remaining options. So let's take our Dracula example once again. If you get your opponent down to 4 health, your Beast Form will be confirmed lethal, because if it's feinted, then it's the 6 over the 2, which is the 4 that you need to close out the game. And if it's not feinted, then you can use Beast Form's ability to bump up the value and confirm the lethal over any other defense. So what that does is it forces the opponent to play in a riskier manner, because there are a couple things they can do given the character to play around confirmed lethals. If they have healing, they can get outside of the lethal range. If they have random discards, let's say Dracula's looking for his Beast Form, he maneuvers, he doesn't find it, so he maneuvers again and he draws it on the second maneuver, but he hasn't had a chance to use it yet because that was the end of his turn. A well-timed discard from the opponent can potentially knock the Beast Form out of hand and take away that confirmed lethal. But in most cases where a fighter doesn't have the healing or the discards, the only thing they can do is go hyper aggressive at you and try to kill you before you're able to find your Beast Form, since the Beast Form will be confirmed lethal. Now, that also can change up the way the aggressive player or the person with the confirmed lethal plays. So if you're Bigfoot, for example, and you get your opponent down to 2 health, now you know Jackalope Horns will be a confirmed lethal because it's 2 auto damage. So what Bigfoot might want to do at that point is run away and use his optional draw ability to just hyper cycle through his deck and find the Jackalope Horns as fast as possible. Now from the opponent, if they can kill Jackalope before he's able to find the horns, then that takes away that confirmed lethal, and Bigfoot will then have to engage and play a more honest game, once again. So it just changes up the way that both players are playing the game if there is a confirmed lethal on the table with a certain card. So what it does is creates a clear-cut win condition for that player. And that will transition us into the last and my personal favorite and probably one of the most important terms in competitive Unmatched, being win condition. So I would define win condition as the specific strategy implemented to win a game given a particular matchup or game state. So pretty much it's just, what's your plan? How are you going to win this game, right? And you should have an overall win condition in your head going into any particular matchup, because that is definitely going to help you out, because knowing your win condition can make certain in-game decisions easier. So let's take, for example, the matchup of Bigfoot versus Bruce Lee. Bigfoot going into the matchup knows that he can rely on 12 damage from 3 logs and 3 jackalope horns, and he just needs to find 2 more damage elsewhere, whether it be momentous shift or savagery or whatever. So it's a very clear-cut win condition. Now Bruce, he knows that he needs to try to kill jackalope quickly and negate some of that auto damage from the horns, thus changing the math on Bigfoot's preset win condition. Or he needs to just catch Bigfoot without proper defenses and pull off some kind of big combo turn to swing things in his favor. So it's not easy at all. But also Bruce has the random discard cheat, which could randomly knock out a log or a horns from Bigfoot's hand and again change the math on that win condition. So that matchup is very clear cut from the beginning, and it can change throughout the course of the game based on card interactions and deck sequence, right? Deck order definitely plays a role in your win condition, because if you're looking for the jackalope horns and it's buried and you can't find it, well, you might just have to give up jackalope early and pivot and try to close out the game a different way. Now, certain matchups are clear like that one, and certain ones are very much on the opposite end of the spectrum, such as Yanenga versus Little Red. So Little Red has so many powerful effects, and Yanenga has no cancels. So it makes it very difficult for Yanenga to play around all of that. So what Yanenga can do, though, is she can take control of the tempo of the game and try to aggress Little Red at the proper moments and make it so that her basket items are just not lining up the way she would want them to, and thus nullifying some of her powerful effects. Also, Yanenga needs to know when to back off and force the initiative onto Little Red, so that maybe she makes Little Red boost, and maybe Little Red doesn't have the proper card to boost with to line up the symbols for the basket. So there's a lot of cool little interactions that can happen throughout the course of that matchup. There's no clear-cut win condition from the start, but as you get closer and closer to the end game, you might be able to identify a win condition at that point given the cards that have already been played and what is left available. So that's just really neat. So overall, I would challenge all of you, anytime you're going into a matchup, think about your win condition, because it's definitely going to help you out and make your decisions a bit easier. And the mark of a great Unmatched player is knowing the win condition going in and also being able to pivot and find a new win condition given the interactions that happen throughout a game, and being able to know when to pivot to a new strategy. So win conditions are just part of my favorite thing to talk about, and I preach win conditions all the time because I think they are very, very important. One of the most important things to being a competitive Unmatched player. So hopefully this talk helped you out a bit. And hopefully I was able to shine some light on some of these terms that you might have been confused about, and hopefully I was able to explain them well enough and clear enough that maybe you can start implementing some of these in your own games. And that's going to do it for the video, everybody. Hopefully you all enjoyed it, and hopefully you can take some of these terms and use your new understanding of them to level up your own gameplay. And if you have not jumped into competitive play, I would highly recommend it. It's a ton of fun. You know, join the Restoration Games Discord, join League. The community is fantastic, so everybody's very welcoming and glad to have new players and show them the ropes. So just jump on in. It's a blast. And hopefully you enjoy this kind of strategy talk. I'm really looking forward to more videos in the series, so leave some comments down below on what kind of topics you would like to hear about in terms of strategy, and I will definitely check them out and see what I can do. But talking Unmatched strategy is one of my favorite things, so I'm really looking forward to see where we go in this series here. But Again, leave a like if you enjoyed this video. Consider subscribing to the channel if you're not already, if you want to see more Unmatched content. And if you want to check out some live gameplay, follow me on Twitch over at twitch.tv/ZeroSkater12, as I stream pretty regularly, at least a couple times a week I try to, and it's always a lot of fun, you know, jumping in, hanging out in chat, and watching some Unmatched. So definitely go follow me on Twitch, and I would love to see you there. So that's going to do it for this video, everybody. Thanks again for watching. I'm ZeroSkater12, and I'll see you next time.